Hey, welcome to the Have I Told You About This podcast, the show where I discuss things that are on the top of my mind each week, and then I get to talk to you about them. And that's the fun part. I'm your host, Brad Cumjun. Today we're going to be stepping back to the summer of the year 2000. Yeah, my mind can go back a long way. See the gray hair? Where in the summer of 2000, a naked super strategist and a hard-edged truck driver, along with a loyal Navy SEAL and a river guide nonetheless, changed TV, actually reality TV, forever. The day these four castaways on the beaches of Borneo devised something so game-changing, it's no exaggeration at all to say that it actually changed television, and it's never been the same since. This is going to be the story of the birth of the Survivor Alliance that changes absolutely everything. They were named the Taggy Four, but it's also a story of trust, betrayal, and calculation, and, as you'll hear, what actually happens to our human souls when the rules are actually up for grabs. So, I hope you will like and subscribe for more great content just like this, so that you'll get your notices every week as new content becomes available here on YouTube. But you can also find the podcast version on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Of course, I would appreciate any help you could give to this brand new show, as it's truly a passion project of mine. So, let's go here. And let's listen in.
The tribe has spoken.
The stuff is the snuff. All right, let's jump into Act 1. I named this Outwit, Taggy's Secret Pact. This actually sets the scene where Survivor is born. Picture it with me. A brand new TV show called Survivor is on. 16 Americans are dumped on a remote island off of Borneo, and they were told to simply outwit, outplay, and outlast one another for $1 million. CBS promoted it as an endurance experiment, but that's not doing the show justice. They called it part Robinson Crusoe, part Lord of the Flies. What nobody, especially the viewers or even the producers, actually not even half the castaway themselves, realized was that this game wouldn't just hinge on your brute strength or your ability to do the challenges or who could build the best shelter. It would actually come down to who could make a deal and, crucially, keep it. At the start, the tribes were worlds apart in their philosophy. You had the Pagong tribe, and they just kind of wanted a vacation in a summer camp. They were always full of laughter and had the good vibes. How about the Taggy tribe, though? Well, thanks to one, Richard Hatch, he was quietly getting ready for war. Why don't we hear from Richard now and see why he was the reason the alliance was actually born?
I did that.
I'm just thinking, I think we're off to a bad start.
Why? Because we're not talking?
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, Richard, you kind of got to do things and talk as you go along, and sometimes things can't be that planned out.
I agree with you. The problem with having no conversation whatsoever, or lots of people talking about different things, is that nobody's working toward a particular goal. Not the silly little stuff about, oh, who's going to sleep where, what are we going to do, but why are we here? And what's the point? And if we don't
I
set
figured
up
that out before I come here.
for you,
But you haven't?
and I have for me, but we haven't for us. And for the next 7 ejections, 21 days, we have to function together or we fail.
What do you think we're doing now?
Not functioning together at all.
There you have it. Richard Hatch, he was a corporate trainer from Rhode Island. He was loquacious, analytical, and yes, he was incredibly comfortable in his own skin, as he all too often showed. He would love to walk around the island naked just to make other people uncomfortable. He also claimed he decoded survivors' real incentive structure well before he ever even stepped on Borneo's shores. You see, when others saw teamwork and camaraderie as the main objective to winning, Richard saw a voting game hiding inside of a popularity contest. He understood something absolutely essential. There was no rule against working together to control votes. And that is, he reasoned, how to win. Now, years later, Richard would reflect on his win and he would say this. He said, I arrived on the island at the same time as everyone else did. We all saw the sign that said Survivor, outwit, outplay, outlast. That's what I've been trying to do in my life, well, since I got here. And the other 15 people just seemed to think they were on vacation. And that brings us to the birth of the Alliance. So we're now at day 11 of the show. The Taggy tribe has already voted out 2 of their own members. And as the game wears on, the tribe starts to actually fracture a little bit. Lots of infighting. So Richard realizes that if he could just rally up a group, a voting bloc is what he was calling it then, well ahead of the term alliance, then they could control their own fate. So one day, while he was out swimming in the ocean, he kind of just idly floated over to Kelly Wigglesworth and Susan Hawk. And he floated his plan to each one of them. Let's create a voting bloc. And if we do that, no one could ever vote us out. They both agreed. They said it was better to carve out their own security with numbers rather than get shafted by the whims of camp politics, which were all over the place, by the way. Well, 3 was good, but 4 would be better. So they actually bring in old Rudy Bosch, the retired Navy SEAL. And Rudy's default suspicion is evident on his weathered face about everybody. But he's actually learned to trust and to like Richard's straight talking. So the alliance was born. Richard, Kelly, Sue, and Rudy, the Taggy 4. And from there, the pact is simple. We simply vote together at every elimination. Don't stray. Don't splinter. Win as a group or lose alone. That takes us to Act 2, Outplay. This is where alliances, quote unquote, break the game and why they were revolutionary. You see, this right here is the moment when Survivor ceases to be a social experiment and it actually becomes a strategic game. Before this, votes just went to whoever was annoying me at the time or whoever I felt was weak or losing challenges or simply they were just unlucky. But after this, every single vote becomes calculated and every friend is a potential pawn. You see, back in 2000, the idea of alliance was a radical thought. No one else had come up with it. The audience was shocked. The opposing tribe could not believe it and were just madder than hell about it. And some producers were even reportedly nervous that this was happening. But the rules, they were silent on alliances. There was no rule against it. So cunning, it turns out, was not just allowed, it was rewarded. On screen, the contrast was electric. It was awesome. The Pagong tribe, who called themselves moral and independent, tried to play fair. They talked openly about how alliances are against the spirit of the show. What's the spirit of the show? This is the first season. They were literally forming that spirit as they were going along. You see, this isn't how it's supposed to work, they said. Gretchen Cordy, who was Pagong's de facto leader at the time, refused to play along with any alliance. Her ethics demanded that she voted with her conscience, not a calculator. In the confessionals, you can almost see the future of Survivor slipping through her fingers as she died on that hill. You see, Richard and Sue, meanwhile, were openly joking about giving their word, and they were laughing in confessionals about how in the game, your word is only good until it isn't. Alliances play huge in the game, and But then you get to something that we call the merge in this particular season, and then what was known and will forever be known as the pagonging. See, after the merge, that's when both tribes join up together, and in this particular season, they had even numbers. The Taggy Four, though, doubled down on their plan. All they had to do was stick together, vote as one, and they would control the vote. Their first target, of course, was Gretchen, the one person smart, strong, and likable enough to unite the others on the other side. So, a tribal council and a vote that's still legendary today in Survivor lore, 7 people each voted for a different target, except for the Taggy Four, who all 4 voted for Gretchen. That made the result 4 to 1. It was a landslide. Gretchen walked off into the night, and the era of the Alliance began. Kelly Wigglesworth in Confessional acknowledges that cold calculus it took to form the Alliance. This is a game, she said. You can't take it personally. If people come here to make bosom buddies, they should have gone to summer camp instead. What followed detonated Survivor's future. Week after week, the remaining Pagongs were picked off, unable to organize a counter strategy at all, or even mimic the one they were seeing working in front of them. The Taggy's Alliance voting bloc never wavered, a process fans then called the pagonging, or basically your whole tribe getting taken out by the other alliance. And that was basically in honor of that Pagong tribe who never saw any of this coming. And you see, Survivor is social science. It teaches us things about life. It's why groups win. So let's ask ourselves for a second, why does this work? Well, let's step back into reality television as a social laboratory for just a minute. There's been a lot of academic research that's been done on Survivor, and they've since supported what played out on our screens. The report said you get a 10% increase in coalition size, right? In other words, if you just grab 4 people like they did, the probability that that coalition stays together increases 5-fold. Isn't that credible? And if an individual has a history of voting with players outside that coalition, they are almost 90% likely to be voted off. Crazy, isn't it? Seems like such a simple thing. Survivor, in other words, though, became an instructive parable about power, about loyalty, and about the dangers of being isolated. You know, I've read a lot of blogs on Survivor, and one of them actually surmised that an alliance is where multiple people all decide ahead of time who's going to win the game. And it's to Taggy's tribe's benefit to work together and all decide on a single person to go home in order to ensure their own safety in the game. And now, Act 3, Outlast. Betrayal, loyalty, and the final endgame. You know, there are emotional consequences to playing the game of Survivor. We see this played out in loyalty versus betrayal. You see, it's wonderful to have an alliance, but eventually the alliance has to turn on each other because there can only be one winner. The Taggy Four, like all alliances, thrived on trust and loyalty until their numbers made it impossible. Survivor, after all, isn't a team sport. There can only be a single winner. So the game tightens and the cracks begin to show. Kelly is the first to become increasingly uneasy, and she forged some friendships outside of the alliance. She started reneging, in other words, voting her own way at times, and all the other 3 began to take notice. Kelly's getting a little freaky, Sue said. She gets a little going like, I'm going to vote somewhere else, and I'm like, just shut up, just vote like us, and shut up. Emotionally, the game starts taking its toll. I feel like a backstabber, Kelly said. I feel like a liar, she admits. She began wrestling with the gap between strategy and her conscience. Rudy, though, blunt as ever, just put it plainly. Look, if you want to win the money, you got to get rid of the competition. This is the best way to do it. The Taggy Alliance rode the numbers all the way until inevitably the only people left were the Taggy Four. And now, as host Jeff Probst would later say, Survivor becomes the antithesis of loyalty because we get our first blind side, the jury in Sue's snake and rat speech. The original Taggy Four then have to turn on each other. Kelly, now the challenge beast, keeps saving herself on immunity, and that forces the others to eat their own. Sue, hurt and burning, delivers the most infamous speech in Survivor history, comparing Richard to a snake that devours the rat, who is Kelly, and declared, "If I were ever on a sinking ship and there were only two life vests, I'd rather be with the snake than the rat." The drama sizzles, even after all these years. The jury's vote was deeply personal. Divides 4-3. Richard, having constructed and then navigated the alliance system, turned out to be the inaugural sole survivor. He played, in modern parlance, what's called the optimal game. Even if, as PhD analysis would later observe, he was never the most athletic, certainly not the most likable, probably the least likable person there. What mattered was that he built the structure that defined power at every key juncture of the game. And now, on to Act 4. Its enduring legacy. Alliances redefine Survivor and actually reality TV. Don't think you haven't seen alliances everywhere else. If you like the new show like The Trader, alliances, right? You've seen alliances form on The Amazing Race, and of course, Big Brother. They're everywhere now. So host Jeff Probst, the show's always the show's moral compass, and the resident philosopher of the show, kind of distilled it down to this. On Survivor, the line between friend and foe is blurred, and alliances are constantly shifting. The game's unpredictable nature demands constant adaptation from its participants as dynamic alliances form, dissolve, reform, and create an environment of perpetual uncertainty. Survivor is a captivating rumination on the complexities of human interaction, and it showcases how the struggle for survival blurs the lines between loyalty and betrayal. You know, in interview after interview, Jeff has returned to this theme. He says in Survivor, it's about what you do if you could get away with it. Survivor is about your own integrity and where you choose to draw ethical and moral lines because here there are no rules. And you know, alliances, that whole way of playing with an alliance, it's literally evolved as the years went along. Remember, we're actually focusing only on year one, but we're seeing right now season 49 play out, and 50 is going to be another major all-star season. So what's happened with it since season one? Well, you had Survivor Micronesia, and that saw the Black Widow Brigade. They flipped the idea of an alliance right on its head. They blindsided everyone, and even convinced Eric Rickenback to give up his own immunity necklace. That was the power of the alliance in that show. Then you had the Cops R Us alliance with Tony Vlachos and Sarah Lucina. They mastered the art of the duo within the alliance, outwitting all comers and demonstrating how trust, when well placed, can be a shield until they turn it and it becomes a dagger. And then you have good old Boston Rob Morano's Redemption Island crew, Stealth R Us, that implemented the buddy system again to keep loyalty ironclad. And then you had Ghost Island, where Wendell and Dominic rode their bromance all the way in their alliance to a historic final tribal tie. Some alliances are even trios, like Ethan, Lex, and Tom. They had a power base on Survivor Africa. Others are just gigantic voting blocks that have even more than 4 people, but they tend to fracture and realign all the time. But more recently in Survivor, it's known as the new era, kind of during the pandemic and post-pandemic. They had to make shorter shows, and they just kept on with this. And there's a lot of changes that I won't go into here for this particular show. But on season 48, alliances were bubbled right to the top. I'm talking about Joe and Eva. If we fast forward to season 48, alliances remained not only central, but at times they were unbreakable. Joe Hunter and Eva Erickson, a duo that literally began on day one, made their alliance known to everyone. It was no secret. So much so that it left viewers, critics, and players wondering. They told everybody way too early. How could the rest of the cast let this clear and present danger survive? You see, Joe was a firefighter and a challenge beast. He checked in with every ally every day and built loyalty one conversation at a time. His style echoed Boston Rob and Kim Spradlin, keeping allies so tight nobody dared step out of his sight. And then you had Eva, a 24-year-old PhD student. She bonded deeply with Joe, even trusting him first with her autism diagnosis. If that would have gotten out early to most people, they would have seen that as a weakness and probably voted her out. Not here. Joe wasn't having any of that. So, that their duo started the alliance that transformed not just strategy, but America's hearts. Eva actually started struggling with her autism during a challenge. It was incredibly visible, and it broke our hearts to watch. And then what happened? Joe, who was on the other tribe at that time, because of a switch, watched Eva, and he went over and broke tribal lines, and he steadied her, offering loyalty, and later, even offering his own spot in the final two to shield her from making a fire making challenge that could have taken her out of the game. What an alliance. The entire Survivor fan base has debated whether this alliance was cunning, coddling, or a little of both. But in the end, it was Eva's own resolve at fire making that secured her place in the finals. And it was the presence of their partnership that shifted the narrative. Proof that alliances in Survivor are not just about numbers, but about trust, your reputation, and your emotional journey. Now, in that season, the finale's jury vote was split a little, proving that alliances don't always guarantee a win. You see, Eva and Joe, though revered by many, lost to Kyle Frazier, who played, well, he had an alliance, but it was only a duo, but it was good enough. It was stealth, and he made a lot of big moves. So he quietly won the game. But his game was more jury friendly, I guess. Now, let's go to Act 5. And here in Act 5, we have dangers of solo play. Why going alone rarely works. You see, throughout the years of gameplay and analytics, one thing is clear. One thing. Pure solo players are extinct in the Survivor Winners Circle. The numbers tell us the majority of sole survivors have been in powerful alliances, and all sole survivors have been in an alliance at one time or another. Solo survivors will find themselves easy targets, their votes scattered amidst a sea of alliances. The emotional testimony from the jury, time and time again, confirms this. Solo play is awful, reflected one juror. And in contrast, and for Survivor, that sentiment holds. When you're alone, you're at the mercy of the crowd's will. Now, of course, there's rare exceptions. Players who navigate tribal swaps well, they fracture votes through chaos, and they shift power. But in the end, they end up getting picked off, or eventually, they find trust somewhere to try to make it to the end, but yet, they never win. And for all the talk of numbers and strategy, Survivor's true magic lies in its emotional resonance with us, the viewers. Jury speeches have become legendary, some raw and rude, some redemptive, some, if eyes were lasers, there would be some heads popping. From Sue Hawk's apocalyptic animal metaphors to the shock and heartbreak of Sierra voting out her own mother on the show, or the public debate after Shan's felt betrayal in season 41. The jury room turns alliances into stories of loyalty, of broken trust, of what it feels like to be outplayed, outwitted, and yes, sometimes even outloved. Blindsides, big moves, and betrayals aren't just TV anymore. They're crucibles for the character. As Jeff Probst has pointed out in countless tribal councils, in Survivor, the line between friend and foe is blurred. That's why to this day, there's no greater twist in reality television than watching someone's best friend hand them their torch. And you hear those words, the tribe has spoken. But now, let me ask you, because this has been rumbling around in my mind, is Survivor a blueprint for life? Here's my thoughts. Since Borneo, alliances are standard, but their lessons, I think, actually reach deep into real life. For instance, don't we learn that trust is currency? Whether you're in the office or on an island, your professional group or your alliance will outcompete the lone wolf every time. And majorities matter. The power to dictate outcomes comes from sticking to a plan, not hoping for chaos. And then betrayal stings, but, in the end, it's inevitable. At some point, every alliance has to splinter. How you handle that endgame, your exit speech, your jury performance, is as critical as your loyalty in the heat of battle. The same is true in our world. And also, adaptation and those who can adapt are the winners. Dynamic alliances form, dissolve, and reform, as Jeff said. So, adaptation is survival. The same in real life. All of us change. All of our jobs change. Our romances change. Our relationships change. People change. Seasons change. And those who adapt are the ones who are the happiest. So, if we've learned now over 48, going on 49 seasons, what we've seen in the academic studies, the blogs, the fan forums, and even thousands of torch snuffs, Survivor is indeed a microcosm of human interaction at its rawest and sometimes ugliest, but often at its most brilliant. So, have I told you about this? The Taggy Four didn't just invent alliance gameplay. They made Survivor immortal by proving it's a game less about survival and more about hubba hubba hubba, who can you trust? And when do you break that trust? So, next time you watch a big reality competition, or even just a tight group of people at work, maybe they're going to lunch all the time, look for the alliances under the surface. Look for the whispers behind the group votes. And remember, in life, as well as in Survivor, a good alliance won't win you everything, but going it alone will clearly lose you everything.
Well, to the rest of you, I guess a somber congratulations. You've survived the tribal council. You have fire. You can head back to camp, and I will see you tomorrow for the next challenge. Good night.
All right, friends, this has been the Have I Told You About This podcast, episode number 1, How the Survivor Alliance Changed Everything. If you've enjoyed this journey with me and rumbling through my mind and my thoughts, look forward to more content just like this coming at you every week. Won't you please consider subscribing and liking, hitting that bell for some more awesome discussions just like this about all the wild and crazy things running through my mind. I have a lot in store for this season. Up next will be an incredible show about the Star Wars arcade game. I've got some incredible behind the scenes making stories, even how that whole license was acquired, lost and acquired again. How it was chosen to be the first vector graphics game that would really go on to becoming basically one of the greatest arcade games of all times, based off of one of the most popular licenses of all time. So, join me next week again, and maybe I'll tell you about something else. Have a great week.